Welcome to the latest episode of Surgeons' Lives. I'm your host, John Monson. My guest today is Dr. Pat Sylla, who is currently the Division Chief of Colon and Rectal Surgery at Mount Sinai in New York. Pat has a very cosmopolitan background. She was born in France, moved fairly shortly thereafter to the Ivory Coast in West Africa, and left there to return to the United States to enter college and medical school and surgical residency. She did her undergraduate in Georgetown in Washington, D.C., medical school and residency in New York, and a colorectal fellowship in Mount Sinai, before moving to Massachusetts General Hospital, where she was directly involved in the development and one of the leaders, if not the leader, in the development of transanal total mesorectal excision, part of the NOTES initiatives that were going on in the world at that time. She moved back to Mount Sinai, accompanying her husband, who's a cardiologist, and has become successful both surgically and administratively and politically, recently finishing a highly successful tenure as president of SAGES. She's also a significant contributor to ASCRS and is becoming increasingly interested in international healthcare issues as the years go on. She has much to say about her early training and the challenges she faced, as well as how she proposes to see her future in the coming years. So without further ado, let's go over and hear our latest guest, Dr. Pat Sylla. Before we do that, please let me remind you to like and subscribe to the channel and send me whatever comments you may have. I'm John Monson, and this is Surgeons' Lives.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining. This is if you've seen any of the other
I have.
episodes.
I saw your very first one, and I've seen a handful of them since then. Really enjoyed them.
You'll know they're not serious. And I normally start by asking people, and I'll ask you to start by telling us a little bit about your life, starting with the words, I was born in.
So I was born in Paris, France, but I actually moved and was raised in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, at 5 years old. So I only spent 5 years in Paris. And then I essentially, my father, who's from Ivory Coast, moved our family to Abidjan, where I was raised until I left for college.
And that was where was he from originally?
So he's from there. My father is originally from Côte d'Ivoire. He has a very interesting and pretty unique story, but he met my mother essentially during his time in the U.S. He got the opportunity of a lifetime to go and actually essentially train and go to college in the U.S. It was a fully funded scholarship back in the 1960s. It was sort of an experiment. They called it the African experiment. Long story short, but he was one of the few ones who got selected to do this, and he ended up in Colby College, met my mother in the Peace Corps while he was giving back and teaching Peace Corps people English. And so he met my mother, who ended up becoming an English teacher, actually a high school teacher, but they fell in love, got married, and they spent some time in France as he was training to return to Ivory Coast to start the very first IBM, the branch IBM in West Africa. Oh. So they brought the family back and settled in Ivory Coast.
So he was a computer guy or a money guy?
Yeah, computer guy.
Computer guy.
Money guy. He eventually became the manager of the
Sure.
company.
Yeah. And then you ended up back again in the States?
So my mother is originally French, and her family immigrated after World War II. They immigrated to the US. So I was lucky in a way that I grew up in West Africa being Ivorian, but also having the American citizenship through her. So I had the chance, when I was essentially done with high school, there was big talk at the time of where is she gonna go? Because my brother had gone to the US for college, and then they weren't sure where they're gonna send me. So initially the goal was the decision was to go to France to study because I was interested in medical school and I had expressed that to them. But then sort of last minute, they said, no, no, we're shipping you back to the US with your brother. So I ended up in the US a little bit unprepared for college. I hadn't really submitted any applications, didn't really know where to go. And so luckily for me, my brother was at American University and my grandmother lived nearby. So I ended up being too late to start college at Georgetown, which was my favorite, the college I wanted to go to in DC. So I ended up doing a first year at AU and then transferred to Georgetown immediately after. So I was one of the lucky ones because of my citizenship. I was able to come to the US and have access to the best education.
So did Georgetown take you as an American or as an Ivorian?
Oh, as an American.
American.
Yeah. And Georgetown was awesome, and I already knew I wanted to go to medical school, so I entered pre-med pretty early, and then I was actually going to stay for medical school. My best friend ended up going to Georgetown Med, where I got an offer, but I also got an offer at Cornell, and I could not resist the draw to go to New York City. I just could not resist the temptation to go to the big city. So
Yeah, I just finished listening to an audio book by a guy called John Sopel, who has been for 40 years a BBC correspondent, and he was the BBC correspondent in DC for 8 years before going back. He's a very well-known guy, and he's in London now, and that's where he's from. And he says he was commenting that DC is maybe the epicenter of power in the US, but it's at heart a small town
yeah,
compared to London or New York.
yeah. Well,
It's
coming from Abidjan, DC was a perfect pace for me for the transition to the US. I mean, it was a complete culture shock, I won't lie, but it was the perfect environment. It was very international. I had friends essentially from every group you can imagine. I have my French friends and my African friends, and the French speakers. And it was just very comfortable to transition to the US and manageable.
do you consider your mother tongue to be French or English?
So we grew up, our first language was French.
Mhm.
She spoke fluent English, of course, but it was not the language in the home.
Yeah, yeah.
And which, I thought the transition would be easier, but it was, that first year was hard. I really had to shape up pretty quickly because I was obviously, I did the whole lycée français, I did the baccalaureate. I was academically very well prepared for the American system, probably a little bit further ahead in terms of APs. It was
Yeah.
no problem, but the English really was tough. That year at AU was key to transition.
Yeah, it was useful for you to sort of hide away and prepare before.
Yeah. Hide away, learn about American culture,
Yeah.
learn about beer, all the American things. It was a very wonderful year, I have to say.
I don't know if you know Tom Cecil, who is a surgeon in Basingstoke.
Mhm.
He's, one of Brendan Moran's colleagues, one thing or another. And Tom was brought up in France until he was 12, I think.
Mhm.
So he learned French, but he stopped at 12. So if you ever travel with him, he speaks French, but he speaks the French of a 12-year-old. It's really quite bizarre. So you said you knew from the beginning that you wanted to do medicine. How come?
I did. I kind of remember very, very clearly when the interest came along, and I have no one in my family in medicine, but I think it was the inspiration of my mother. I had a very clear picture that I wanted to become a reconstructive facial surgeon. There was a community of mothers and teachers at the school where we went, where my mother was a teacher that essentially got together and helped collect funding essentially to support cleft palate surgeries. And
Yeah.
they would have teams coming from Médecins Sans Frontières and other groups that would come usually once a year and organize teams. And the key was they would pay for everything. It would be no cost to the patients, but the community would come together and help rally getting supplies, the surgical supplies. So that was at the time. But I used to accompany my mother, and I used to kind of see the kids in the streets. Those kids would be rejected. So
Yes.
in that culture, in that city, those kids were considered to be cursed. So
Yeah.
they would essentially be begging in the streets. And so the community would really come together to do that. And I remember especially seeing them after surgery and being involved in their recovery. I was struck by the magic of the operation. And so I kind of grew up with a fantasy that I would become one of those surgeons. And
What is now, of course, Operation Smile,
yes,
um,
exactly.
and very successful. And it's right across that part of the world. My sister is a missionary in Cameroon.
Oh,
Not all the time. I mean, she's there. She lived there for a number of years, and that's a big issue for them there
yeah,
as well. So, and do you go back?
I do. I used to go back occasionally once a year and then maybe a little less frequently after I had my children. There was a big problem in Ivory Coast. They had a coup and then a civil
Yeah.
war that was really devastating. And so my parents actually weathered it and stayed in the country, which was really scary.
Yeah.
And the country kind of recovered from that, and then COVID happened, and so I wasn't really going for quite some time. I used to meet my parents in France. That was sort of like the neutral territory where they would get their medical care. But then COVID happened, and unfortunately, my father died just about a year after COVID. And ever since, my brother and I, kind of rallied. And so we've been pretty much going there every 3 to 4 months now. So we go 3 or 4 times a year to keep an eye on my mom, of course, and take care of some of my father's affairs. So it's been a bit of a reconnection with my
Yeah.
home, which has been actually quite nice. I've actually connected with some surgeons locally, and that's something that I want to consider in the future. That might be a big part of what I do as I get
Yeah.
older.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Home, home always has a draw on the heartstrings,
Yeah.
for lots of reasons, etc. And particularly when it's, so starkly different. You're working in New York. It's not the same, although occasionally one wonders what goes on in New York in terms of surgical care, as you know. But
Yeah.
anyway, we will skip over that little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So your ambition, well, you've just said your ambition was to go to medicine and to be a facial reconstructive
Yep.
surgeon, but that changed a little. I mean, you ultimately modified it.
Yeah. So it's interesting because if you know me, I tend to be fairly stubborn. I I am not easily deterred from an objective, and so I was determined that's what I was going to be doing. And interestingly, I got to Cornell and I decided my first year medical school to actually find myself a mentor. I figure I'm going to find someone who does this, and I'm going to walk up to him or her and do an internship with them during the summer, which is exactly what I did. So I found someone, an ENT surgeon there. Didn't really know much about him, but I figured he does exactly what I want to do. And I signed up for a research project on HPV and head and neck cancer, the standard stuff.
Yeah.
Followed him in the OR, long cases, and turns out that he was probably the absolute worst mentor I could have had. So it was actually quite a negative experience. And at that time, I didn't really think about why. We just didn't connect. He wouldn't talk to me. He wouldn't mentor me. And so it was a very isolating experience. And to make matters worse, after I delivered to him a paper, that was my first research project, no feedback and gave me a terrible grade. And I actually had to go and complain about it and essentially write up a full report of how poor the experience was and how bad it was. And so they retracted, the grade. It was fine, but it left me with a sense of being really at loss. I kind of equated surgeons with, poor culture, really selfish, self-centered, not good mentors, and it turned me off completely of surgery. So I went through this phase whereas like this is not going to work out. I'm disillusioned, and I went through my rotations. I find myself in my third year rotations, kind of trying every way I could to forget about surgery. And luckily for me, when I walked into my general surgery rotation as a student, find myself back into the OR and realizing this is exactly where I belong. And so that brought back all those feelings and the sense of belonging in the operating room. But I knew at that point I needed to surround myself with better mentors and
How did you do that?
I'm sorry.
How did you do that?
So I got very lucky. I did a rotation at Mount Sinai. So my relationship with Mount Sinai goes way back.
Yeah.
I did a sub-I, and by pure luck, I ended up on the GI colorectal team. Dr. Steinhagen was essentially my first real mentor. And even though I didn't go there for my residency, we stayed in touch for years. I mean, he was the inspiration for colorectal. That was it. I walked in the OR. These were the days where Michel Gagné, Milsim, all the big names. This was the mecca of MIS. Barry Salke, everybody was there. And I happened to walk in as a third-year student, walking into ORs with things that were not happening at Cornell. It was just cutting edge, incredible stuff. And so that was it for me and colorectal. And so I was very lucky. Steinhagen was a mentor for all those years subsequently, and I came back there to train for my colorectal fellowship. This was not random. This was planned.
So now had a you had a different ambition. It wasn't cleft palate and facial reconstruction. What was your ambition? I mean, obviously you needed to graduate as a colorectal surgeon, but what did you want to do? What was your ambition?
At that point, I really felt academic surgery. I was more drawn to research and teaching. I really love every research project that I took on as a medical student, as a resident. I really enjoyed, and so I really liked the research questions and the clinical focus. I spent a year in residency doing research with Larry Whalen, which I'm sure you know very well. And this was actually very interesting because it was my first sort of thinking of basic science, the mechanism behind the impact of laparoscopy or the differences between laparoscopic and open surgery and recovery. So it was sort of at the immune cell level, understanding why laparoscopy was so beneficial to patients. So that was the closest I got to basic science was really there. But I really saw myself having a practice and in an academic center, teaching and contributing to science. That was the vision.
So you've been, and we'll bounce around a bit here. You've been very successful in your career and academically very successful, politically very successful. In an era when women in surgery easier than maybe 20 years earlier. And I've interviewed, as you know, a number of women on this podcast, etc. And you get there's a consistent sort of view that for them, not necessarily everyone else, but for them, they did not find it a negative experience, as in they were wholly supported. People like Tracy Hull, Julie Freischlag, one thing or another. Did you find challenges? Did you find it difficult? Did you have to be 10% better than the man, or all of those cliches, or they're not cliches, but you know what I mean?
John, I don't know if you interviewed a lot of African-American surgeons, but when you're African-American and look like me, maybe with a French accent.
I was going to say with a funny accent,
I worked very hard on my accent, believe me, but you do know that you have to perform better than everyone else. It's just, you don't need someone to come and tell you, and tap on your shoulder to say, there are not that many people who look like you who've achieved what you want to achieve. So you carry that weight in everything you do, in the way you conduct yourself. And so there were obstacles, and it's really funny because when the obstacles happen, when you're in that environment, that high pressure environment, you don't stop and think, is it because I'm a woman or is it because I'm Black? You just know there's an obstacle and you need to just figure out how to get around it as quickly and painlessly with as little conflict and attention to yourself as possible. So that's what needed to happen. So there were several instances that maybe years later, even an interaction with that ENT, is it because he didn't like women? Is it because he didn't like me for other reasons? I never really stopped and thought about it. It was more, there's a problem. This is affecting my vision of my future, and how do I get around that and recoil and recover and figure out what I'm going to do next? I mean, that's survival mode. So I think in retrospect, I think there were definitely instances where it would have helped tremendously to have someone who looked like me or someone to talk to. I didn't really have a female role model until I got to residency. In my third year, Tracy Arnell was the first. Amina Wong was there before, but Tracy Arnell was really the one who came in, who really embedded everything I was looking for. And she was dynamic, and she was academic, and she was just very strong-headed and a leader. And she came in as a new chief, and it was really comforting to finally have that. And I had co-residents, female co-residents. So I can't complain. I wasn't the first African American resident in my class at Columbia, and so I think I was very lucky in that way that I had people I could look up to as I was ascending through the ladder. I could talk to and share those experiences with. But we didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking of the why. we made sure we got to the next level. But to your question, you do know you have to excel. There is no room for mediocrity. And you just have to do the extra work so that there's never going to be a question of your performance compared to your peers.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting, let's call it prejudice, whatever that word means, it's different things to different people, but it comes in different shapes and sizes. Sometimes I think Americans, whatever that means, quite like people with an accent. They think they must be intelligent if they have an accent, At the same time, the world has a prejudice against different, wherever you are in the world, whether it's in disintegrating Yugoslavia, and different is not liked. And sometimes it's color, sometimes it's look, sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's gender. And, not all of it gets, has, programs built around it. Whether it's women in surgery or African-American surgeons or whatever. And it is interesting to see how society has changed over the years. I also think it depends where you are. Some countries are a little more colorblind than others, I think. So,
Yep.
But I don't think any countries are totally colorblind or visually blind, whatever the difference is.
Yeah. But no matter what my experience was, I think in a lot of ways I was very lucky being in New York. I felt safer and definitely more comfortable in big cities, but especially New York. This is in a way has shaped my decision in terms of my subsequent moves. I've been very aware of the environment and this having to decide, do I want to be the first or the only of ... When given the chance, I would rather not. For all the reasons that I mentioned, having others, women and African American faculty and colleagues provides an enormous source of comfort. And now I'm married to a Jewish Caucasian male, and I'm raising biracial Jewish children. And there's not many places where I would feel more comfortable than in New York, where I don't have to you know, face instances where I'm working with my kids who are quite light skinned, and like in Boston where people would assume I'm the nanny. You know, those are the things that happen, and you can't even get angry. This is not microaggression, it's ignorance. It's just never having seen that family picture before. And so when given the chance, even though we can do it, we can always do it. If you're given the choice, you may want to, you know, stay in those areas where there's a few more like you, and these biracial dynamics, family dynamics, that was important to me. And knowing that I had a Jewish community, and also a very vibrant French community, and African community was important. So I got very lucky to find my niche, and really find myself in New York City.
I think I'm going to remember that, though, the being mistaken for the nanny.
So many times you cannot even imagine. And then you get the people who just, at least it just comes out, and others who kind of look at you funny and they can't really figure out, you know, and you can see the brains kind of working around it. So you just,
Exactly.
there's so
So,
many ways to respond. You just have to be
so you
as, you
mentioned
know,
you mentioned that you ended up in Boston with another strong mentor.
yeah. Oh, yeah. So Boston was really fascinating. I was very anxious about going to Boston initially. I followed my husband. That's the reason I went after my colorectal fellowship. My husband, who's an MD PhD, who had big dreams also to do his postdoc in cardiology at the Brigham, had his, you know, ideal job lined up. So we obviously wanted to make it work. And luckily for me, I loved colorectal, but I also loved MIS. You know, some of my big mentors besides Kenneth Ford, you know, where minimally invasive surgeons. And so I always thought, you know, I'm going to be a minimally invasive colorectal surgeon. I'm going to do the colorectal fellowship. But at the time, you know, MIS was still not mainstream as much.
Sure.
So I figured, you know, I'm going to go to Boston and I'm going to apply for fellowships. I got very lucky. I matched at MGH, and you know, Boston is different than New York, but I can tell you that academically, professionally, these were incredible 8.5 years. And Dave Ratner was a big part of that, and I felt great. I mean, professionally, it was an incredible experience that I would never regret.
Yeah. 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 I mean,
Yeah,
whether it's fortunate or luck or just good judgment, you've had excellent mentors throughout the years.
yeah.
Maybe you could have made something of your career, you know, if with all of these good mentors.
Exactly.
And then you found that you went back to New York.
Yeah. So when we were looking for a job for Paul, you know, he got an offer to stay at the Brigham. We really worked it hard. You know, Keith Lillimo was incredible trying
Yeah.
you know, to keep us in Boston, but the cardiology division was going through big changes at the Brigham. He was unstable, and his package was really not great. With raising two children, we just knew he was not ideal. So we got a chance. He got an offer to go to Rockefeller, where he did his PhD, and so. And with my relationship at Sinai, which was still very strong, it was a no-brainer to come back home closer to family. We have his in-laws live in New Jersey. So that's what we did.
It's interesting, you know, sometimes the package is inversely related to the reputation of the institution. And you know, I spent some time in the UK at a dinner discussing the chair of surgery, the Regis Chair of Surgery in Oxford, which is an impressively expensive place to live, Oxford. You know, it's
Yeah.
6,000 years old and all of that sort of stuff, and beautiful, but it's very expensive. And I asked the dean, I said, you know, does the university have any arrangements with finance companies over maybe low cost mortgages for its faculty? And first of all, it took a minute or two for him to understand what I was asking,
It's like,
because this was a bit strange. And then he said, no, 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 we don't know. And he said, but you do realize the holder of the Regis Chair is a fellow of Green College. And I remember thinking to myself, this guy actually thinks that's some form of legal tender, you know,
yeah.
that, you know, just the glory is,
Yep.
and suffice to say, Suffice to say, we didn't move forward with that conversation.
We didn't.
It's it happens a while. So now you, as I said earlier, you've been extraordinarily successful at what I think would be regarded as a fairly young age in your career, compared to the generic old white guy type stuff. So, and you just finished your very successful tenure as president of Sages, et cetera, et cetera. And so what's next?
Um, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't know exactly. I know that I'm having fun. You know, I became system chief of the colorectal division, which was really my dream. Just literally before becoming president-elect, it's only been 2 years. And I've really enjoyed that role quite a bit. And I know the saying that, you know, most chairs have said, you know, being division chief is the most fun they've ever had because you get a chance to really build and enact your vision, but without all the demands of being a chair. So it's been a blast, you know, since last year, and so I'm really focused on that and developing my division further, and the research has been great. So it's a combination of the research and in teaching and fellowship, and so it's I haven't really thought of the next step. There's obviously a lot of possibilities, and I like to keep options open.
But there will be a next step. I mean, whether you are system chief for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, whatever,
Right.
you're young enough that there will be a next step. Do you think would you be a good chair?
I'm not really 100% sure. I think if you look at the various metrics, I think there's a difference between being a good chair and wanting to be a good chair or being a chair in general. And I have these are the questions that I pose myself. Um, and luckily for me, I have enough people in those positions to advise me. But I think I have to balance, you know, what makes me happy with what people might expect of me. Um, so I've always felt, you know, maybe the next step is for a division chief is after a couple of years is it gets boring and you want to do something else, and the next step up is department chair. It sounds very much so, but I don't have yet the full understanding of whether or not I would really enjoy that position. I'm not 100. I'm not quite there yet.
I think I was a chair for 15 years, and I think you only discover that when you're about 3 years into it. I mean, and it's changed over years. A chair said to me a couple of years ago, in a moment of frustration, he said, as far as I can see, the only thing I'm here for is to make sure the faculty get their flu vaccine, because, that back in the days of the 50s and 60s and before professional reimbursement, all of that financial dynamo from surgery was actually in the control of the chair of surgery.
Mm.
Now, because professional reimbursement is plummeted and it's all facility reimbursement,
Yeah.
the financial dynamo that is surgery is in the control of the CEO. And the chair of surgery is going cap in hand to the CEO saying, could I have some backstop for my deadbeat surgeons who are working their ass off, but not making enough money to make a living in Manhattan or wherever it might be. I mean, it's a very different dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a very different dynamic.
So what and that as you contemplate that and close your eyes and imagine balancing your life, your happiness, your job, your research, what are you really good at?
I am good at thinking outside the box. I really enjoy taking on the clinical problems and solving them. I'm really good at thinking of unusual, unexpected solutions. I think I've always felt that way. I like to think of myself as an innovator, but it's really, looking at the problem from
Yeah.
different angles. I'm also really good at collaborating. I think one of the things I've really enjoyed as I'm, getting older is the power of collaborations. I've been very focused on, you know, regional and national and now international collaborations and the power of research collaboratives and what it gives you. And learning from my European colleagues has been one of the biggest source of joy and growth that I've had over the past couple of years. So there's a few things I feel like I'm still growing in some of those areas, and in a way that has enriched me and helped me give back to my patients and my teams in such a valuable way that I'm not ready to give that up. That's why when I think of department chair, I feel I will grow in certain ways and I'll contribute and help and advocate and do all those other things that I care about. But am I ready to give up these other pieces that I'm really having a blast with? So that's what I'm balancing right now. I think there's not really an expiration date for making those decisions. I think I'm still in a growth phase right now that I'm really enjoying. I'm spending a lot of time in South America and Europe. I'm still involved in a lot of innovation and new technologies, and I'm loving it.
I interviewed a couple of people. Norman Williams, a very good example, who was president of the college in the UK, who then went into mainstream politics as an advisor to various government people.
Mm.
And I caught, when I interviewed him, I asked him the question that I'd asked Ara Darzi, who's a very old and good friend of mine. Don't you find being in mainstream politics frustrating because you're not able to use your surgical skills? And both of them said, yeah, as a surgeon, you can help the lives of 1,000 or 10,000 people.
Right.
But doing what I do, I maybe can help the lives of 20 million people. And you have an international cosmopolitan, I think it would be a trendy term, background, French, African, American, uh, I could see you in the UN.
Oh my God.
I'm only throwing that out to just, so does that attract you?
The UN? No.
But you know what I mean? I mean,
But leveraging those networks
yeah,
and understanding and my especially my cultural awareness.
yeah,
Yes, there's no question that does interest me
yeah,
significantly. That's these are some of the things. Again, I've been more involved in global surgery than I have before. I always
yeah.
felt I can't do everything. I can't raise my family, grow my local brand and develop a practice, and then also spend, by the way, 6 weeks a year, in Uganda, which even my chair is asking me to do. It's like, share a little bit more of yourself with, for more, lower resource environment. You need to do that work. And I completely agree. It's just figuring out the time to really, I don't do things without passion. Everything I do, to me, I have to give 100%. It's not, you can't dab into global surgery. You have to be all in.
For sure.
So it's these are the things that I've definitely have a passion for. But you're right. I mean, hospital management, building teams and being more impactful as a chair also obviously interests me in that way. Can I affect change at a larger level, be more influential in this decision making and protecting, especially our surgeons? I mean, all of those are very exciting and interesting prospects. I just can't do it all, so I have to prioritize.
So now it's as though you have a script. You just said protecting our surgeons. So of the interviews that I've done, several of the individuals were at, very high level of their career, and then one day got fired.
Yep.
Some were quite open and transparent in discussing it, and others not so. I mean, and that's not a critique. It's just a statement of fact. My question to you is, somebody said to me recently that surgery is much less of a nice place to be these days than it used to be. And I guess that, people in medical specialties would probably say the same thing, I'm sure. It's, it's the modern healthcare. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, I think everybody's feeling it. I think my generation and the older generation for sure, and the younger generation has, there's definitely a conflict there. I think the issue of value. I mean, I think you've verbalized it very well in your previous interviews. I think we're there's a lot of concern that we're being completely undervalued, and that um, the corporatization of medicine in general is hurting us, and you almost have to make a choice. And it's problematic. I think we feel it. We try to ignore it. You always have this sort of fantasy that, you do good work, you work really hard, you're always going to reap the benefits no matter what. I'm going to be protected, I'm going to be safe. But that means nothing right now. You're as vulnerable as the next one. Your hospital system is as vulnerable as the next ones. And we're seeing this in New York. The consolidation of health systems is really scary. And somebody moves in and sets new rules and of reimbursement, and your whole value system, your whole paradigm shifts all of a sudden. It's like you no longer are valued for the things that you were doing. You're valued for something else. Another metric has emerged as being the top metric. And so it's scary. I think a lot of us, and at least for myself, that's what I kind of think about, starting to widen my portfolio a little bit, become better at other things. I think it's going to be very important to sort of think of what would I do if things were not great? Do I just move to another hospital system, or do I change my role within the organization? Do I do something else? I think it's something that we're all thinking about. We should be thinking about.
So you told me what you were good at. So if I went to some of your colleagues and said, and they were like in a grumpy mood, what would they say you were bad at?
Oh, wow. I am bad at compromising. I will be honest. I think I've gotten better at reaching consensus and listening to other voices, and but there are things that I have find very difficult to compromise. And I think as a chair, that's probably the piece I would have to work the hardest on. The bottom line, if I feel that there's decisions that could impact quality of care, this will be a red line for me. I know myself, and I know it will take a lot to not prioritize, again, the surgeons, the hardworking, the quality. So these are the things that I know some people are really good at. They're able to navigate that in a more diplomatic way. I think this is something I will have to get a bit better, is to find other ways, to come to resolution. And
It certainly rules you out of mainstream politics, which is all about compromise. And
yeah,
I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, if I can't get what I want this year, I'll get what I can get.
yeah,
Come back next year and see if I can get a bit more. And he was a master at that.
yeah.
Okay, let's in the time left to us, let's pivot from less weighty matters to more reasonable matters. So, on the rare occasions when you switch the lights out on the office, what is fun for you?
Oh, we love to eat out. I mean, that's one of the benefits of New York. We love to travel. So I'm a huge travel fanatic. And just spending time with my boys, honestly, are my three greatest sources of pleasure.
You travel en famille?
En famille as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, as much as possible.
Yeah.
My kids are definitely spoiled in that regard.
Do you have any hobbies? I mean, are you a runner? Or are you whatever?
Yeah, no, I'm a fanatic of strength training. That's something I've discovered a little bit later in life. I love to bike, but not cycling, not the intense type. I got myself an electric bike a couple of years ago and absolutely love it. So I've been more daring with it. Commuting in New York City is definitely daring.
Yes, that's true.
But
And
just the regular stuff.
if you deliver some food, you can make some money on the bike as well.
Exactly.
So, whenever it is that your people are talking about you in alive or dead, the past tense, they will remember you. How would you like to be remembered, and
Yeah.
how do you think you will be remembered?
I think people will probably remember by me being passionate and committed. I'm loyal, um, and I can't. I think I'd like to be remembered along those terms as well, but I'd like to be remembered also as a good person, or at least someone who did good. Um, and yeah, I mean, I think everything I've done was really with, was deliberately intended to improve patient care or improve outcomes. It was always very, goal oriented, to make a difference. And I hope I will be remembered in that way.
And what would you tell the 25-year-old Pat Sylla?
Oh, the 25-year-old is take a breath. Maybe enjoy life. I think I'm enjoying life better now than I was when I was younger. I think I wanted everything immediately. I was lucky that it did hurt some of my relationships, but the most fundamental relationship with my husband, luckily for me, was not affected by it. It could have very well been because I definitely had difficulty prioritizing, family versus my career, the things that I absolutely wanted to achieve. And at times, I know I wasn't always there for my husband. I wasn't always there for my kids. I think I'm making up for it now. But so I would tell my 25-year-old, take a breath, prioritize better, remember that ultimately, family comes number one, and all those other goals, you'll get there. Just kind of breathe and enjoy the process.
Yeah, I sometimes tell people that, nothing you do today matters really, you know. And the other thing, when it comes to a hospital drama, if you go away for 2 weeks and come back, I guarantee nothing will have happened.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
real
Yeah.
real crises are rare, but perceived crises are a daily thing. So, okay.
Good point.
So, what happens when we die?
Oh, we're dead. Maybe that's my Muslim upbringing from my father. But yeah, I think you hit the ground and that's that.
That's it, done and
Yeah.
dusted. Okay. Have you ever asked anyone for an autograph?
No. Interesting question. No.
And so if I gave you 12 months to get an autograph, who would you ask?
Oh, uh, Barack Obama. Uh, how many people do I have?
No, you just have one. Um, but
Yeah.
I'll double it to say that on Friday, you have two spare seats at home and a dinner you're having, and you can invite anyone from history, alive or dead, two people.
Wow. Okay. I would say mm, Martin Luther King and Barack Obama. And they have to be alive. It would be the couple. I mean, I'd love to have Michelle there as well.
Do you think Martin Luther King would get on with Barack Obama?
I do.
So cats or dogs?
Neither. I'm a guinea pig fanatic.
Guinea pigs?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that does. I mean, that opens up a whole
Yeah.
series of totally inappropriate jokes. I mean, in is that roasted or grilled or
Oh God, no. I've had pets. I've had guinea pig pets since I was a little girl, and they've always been part of my life. And my kids now love them. So
I had a very good friend in England who her daughter had guinea pig, and she discovered to her horror that the guinea pig was dead. And so she went out and got another guinea pig, and the guinea pig did not look exactly like the first guinea pig. And so the daughter, who was young, you know, she was like 4 or something like that,
Yeah.
said, that doesn't look like my again. To which she said to her, this is her winter coat.
Oh my goodness.
And she got away with it.
Wow, that's impressive.
Just
Tell
got
the next
away
one.
with it. So do you have a favorite movie?
Oh, I have several favorites. I'm a big sci-fi fan, but I would have to say if I had to pick one, I love Dune.
Oh, wow, sci-fi,
Yeah,
right.
I'm obsessed.
Oh, I have a former resident who is a Trekkie,
Hmm.
and he's like a serious Trekkie. Him and his wife and his kids, they get dressed up and they go to these
Oh, yeah,
things, you know?
yeah.
And
No, we're not that extreme, but I just like a good plot, futuristic plot.
and best book you ever read?
I would say the book that had the most lasting impact on me as a young girl is Le Deuxième Sexe from Simone de Beauvoir. Probably one of the most famous feminist book. 1949. I read it when I was 16, and to this day, I think this was the most impactful in terms of my perception of women in general in society. I thought it was true education by a master.
And have you ever deviated from that original view, or is it that the view that has driven you for the years since?
It has.
Yeah.
It was deeply impactful because it was a book that I read before, um, when I was still a virgin, to be quite honest, and it gave me a completely different perspective on relationship, on everything, and made me aware of how women have been manipulated and used, and sort of framing all of that. It's sex is not just sex. It has a lot of implications and the power struggle, involved in that simple act. And so it was a very enlightening. And even after many years rereading it again, I felt the lessons really carried through. And then now you look at the politics shaping around us around the world, and her words still resonate. I would really encourage young women and older women to read it. It's 1949 and the lessons still hold true.
If you weren't a surgeon, what would you be?
Oh, I would love to be a chef, although I can't cook. But I love the chaos of the kitchen. I know, I know. I watched this show, The Bear. I'm sure you've heard about it, and watching the scenes of chaos, and it's exactly what happened in the back kitchen. And I felt this is us. This is us surgeons, delivering the best possible product under incredible amount of pressure. And it resonated. It's like I would migrate from one high pressure environment to another. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I watch a lot of cookery shows. I like to cook. It doesn't mean I can cook, but I cook a lot. But I'm constantly impressed by what a singularly unhealthy group of people chefs are.
Yeah, they're
They're
worth it all.
all that none of them look good. Yeah.
I probably would be in more of a managerial position, though. Probably not in the front, probably in the back.
Maybe in the yeah, okay. So you go to the World Cup, FIFA World Cup,
Mm.
and the good news is that the USA, France, and Ivory Coast have
Oh my
all
God.
qualified.
Les éléphants. Okay. I'm sorry, but I have to vote. I have to vouch for the Les éléphants, les éléphants, which is the Ivorian team. We had some really amazing players. I'm sure you know.
But
My son, actually, his nickname is Yaya for Yaya Touré, even
yes.
though his name is Ariel. But this is just homage to the amazing players that are there.
Well, yeah, I go back to I go back to the generation before Yaya and before
Yeah.
Didier, etc.
Yeah.
Roger, what was his name? And that group from the Cameroon at the same time,
Yes.
Roger Miller was his name, who at the time that Ivory Coast came along as well, etc. So you, the reason I asked you that is because I heard somebody's reminding me that in the 80s, there was a conservative politician in the UK that introduced what he called, and this was an argument in the UK over immigration, plus ça change. And there, the immigration issue in the UK was the Asian population, Indian, Pakistani, etc., etc. Of course, coming from the empire, and he said the test of Britishness was if there was a cricket test match, India against England, who would you support?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And he said, he was pointing his finger at the Asian population, said, if you support Indian, you're not British.
Oh.
And I'm thinking of this because I'm thinking to myself, if Ireland play the USA tomorrow, I'm sorry, it's Ireland.
Of course.
And it's nothing to do with your nationality. It's just that's the way you were brought up, So, all right, Pat. Listen, well, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. As you know, this comes out in a listening and a watching form. It'll probably come out in a couple of weeks. I'll send you links, etc., and let you know when you have to switch the lights out and lock the doors. Et and I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was almost like a bit of a mentoring session. Thank you. It made me food for thought.
I don't know about that. It's probably asking you questions that maybe you've been trying to avoid.
Great questions. Thank you for that.